All right, welcome everyone. Nice to see you all again. Hopefully you enjoyed a break from our session last week. We're able to have a bit of rest and relaxation, recognizing we didn't have our Monday meeting. And now we are back with a bang. I want to start with a few important announcements for the general awareness of the group before I hand it over to our speaker for today. I want to ask this group if anyone has been successful in having their press release published.
I'm in touch with someone currently, so it might be going somewhere, but I'll keep you updated. I am making progress.
Awesome. Progress is always encouraging. So don't just keep me updated though, please keep the rest of the group aware as well, because I want us all to be able to see what is being published and share in the excitement around what is being released. And on that note, there was an announcement that went out in the syllabus newsletter, which is one of the ABA publications that is put out by the legal education section that I've just dropped a link to in the chat. So that was just published last week. I share that for your own awareness, and if you want to amplify that further, by all means, please do so. But also to show that when I'm asking you to do things, I am also doing them myself. So know that we are truly working in this in collaboration. Also, in looking at the research and partnership theme spreadsheet, there are still a number of folks who have not included what they will be researching or undertaking this semester. So I'm dropping a link to that document or that spreadsheet again into the chat. The deadline for completing that was last week. So if you have not yet done that, please do so. And if, of course, you have questions, concerns about what is expected of you in putting that forward, please let me know. I am happy to continue to brainstorm with you, recognizing that the research identification process is iterative. What you are putting into this spreadsheet does not have to be final. It is just so that I have a general awareness around what you will be pursuing so that I can better tell the larger story around what the fellowship program is undertaking. As your work evolves, that this can be updated. Again, just keeping me aware throughout the process is what is key. Related, I will be holding office hours this Wednesday, which is March 1st. Those will take place from 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. And I encourage as many of you to participate as are able. That is an unstructured time to talk through what you might be researching, brainstorm around any challenges that you have encountered, and also get to know the rest of the group as much as you are able. So hopefully that will be a fruitful time. No one showed up to the last one, so hopefully this one will spark greater participation. And then related, we have the mapping and data upload instructions that went out last week, 2 weeks ago. I've not seen much engagement in those spreadsheets, so please let me know if you're encountering any difficulty. Again, office hours might be a good opportunity to brainstorm around that with other students or ask questions in a safe, understanding space. But related to that, does anyone have any questions on the mapping component or the data upload for your jurisdiction? I say the mapping, I'm doing the mapping component, you're just compiling the data, so know that that is not expected of you. I also did push that out live onto the consortium's website last week, I believe. So if you are not compulsively refreshing the Legal Education Police Practices Consortium webpage like I am, that can be seen on our research page here. I will wait to upload that with the updated information until later in the term, just so I'm not refreshing it each time a new line is highlighted. But I am very excited to see that launched. see. Okay, any questions, concerns about research, about data upload, about any of your partnerships that are being pursued, about office hours? Fantastic. Well, in that case, I am delighted that we are today joined by Dr. Jennifer Bourgeois from the Center for Justice Research at Texas Southern University. Dr. Bourgeois is a Center for Justice Research postdoctoral fellow, and her research interests include risk and resilient factors associated with children and youth impacted by family and/or parental incarceration, the intersection of race, class, and gender within the criminal justice system, and criminal justice program evaluation, which is what makes her a leading expert in this space and such a valuable voice to contribute to our conversation today. I have asked Jennifer to speak to us today about evaluating the efficacy of reform efforts, recognizing that we have heard from a few different scholars on their work in various reform efforts. I wanted to get a better read on what we know is working, and I'm delighted that she accepted our invitation to be with us today. So Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time on a Monday afternoon. I hand the floor to you.
Hi, everybody. So this will be a little interactive. I know it's a Monday. I know it's Zoom. I know all those things. I was just sharing with Jesselyn that I also teach a lot of undergraduates, and holding their attention takes a lot. So there will be a couple of questions that I have embedded in here. If you feel the need to raise your hand and want to jump in and interact, that is perfectly fine. I'll only be speaking for about maybe 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll open up for a conversation. So just like what my background said, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Justice Research, and we do a lot of different things at the center. We look at anything that relates to mass incarceration and how to dismantle mass incarceration. We look at things all the way from the initial point of arrest all the way through reentry. And what we try to do is, by using empirical evidence, program evaluations, things like that, provide recommendations, suggestions for how to change the system or reimagine the system. Also, in addition to being in academia, I have over 10 years of experience of working in the criminal justice field. So I was a former probation officer, a former drug chemist, a former firearms examiner, and a former special agent for the government. So I always tell people I have experience working in like every single component of the criminal justice system, from law enforcement, courts to corrections. So I'm just here to serve as a resource for y'all. And let me share my screen, a little PowerPoint. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
We can, yes.
Perfect. So like I said, the topic for today is I'm going to focus on evaluating the efficacy of police reform efforts. So quick little question. Let me see if it'll go to the next slide. Just kind of thinking, and you can feel free to drop this in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, how many bills do you think have been considered across the nation since the murder of George Floyd in 2020? So since 2020, how many different bills regarding policing do you think have been considered? Do you think it's more than 100, more than 1,000, more than 2,000? So feel free to drop it in the chat. Okay, a few people said 300, 200, 7,000, 80. So I came across this question because what it led me to think about was, across the nation during this time, during 2020, when we were dealing with the pandemic, as well as the epidemic of the killing of unarmed individuals, there were just a slew of reform bills that were being introduced as a result of George Floyd's murder. A lot of those bills during this particular time, it focused on things such as, let me move the little chat thing out of that. So it focused on a lot of different things such as use of force, data collection, transparency, police misconduct. So the actual answer is 4,500. That is a lot of bills. Every state introduced some type of legislation since the murder of George Floyd. That was the sweeping number that I came across. And like I said, it kind of sparked our interest and made us kind of think about, so out of those bills that were introduced, how far did they make it? So a little bit of overview. So after the murder of George Floyd, across the nation, we saw Americans demanding changes to law enforcement protocols as a response to the epidemic of police misconduct. So when I think about 2020, I think of two things that come to mind. We are in the pandemic of COVID, and then we have this murder of George Floyd. And it was during that time where it was almost at the point where America and across the nation had just reached its breaking point. And we started to see just everybody a call to action. How can we fix this problem? So there was this surge of legislation activity. One way that the Center for Justice Reform or Center for Justice Research, what we did was our director, Dr. Howard Henderson, he put together a national police reform advisory group. And it was a group of individuals across the nation that had experience and were experts in the field in policing, from former police officers to former police chiefs to researchers, brought a lot of different people to the table to figure out what can we do. Then underneath that National Police Reform Advisory Group, we created a policy subcommittee. So one way to make a difference, one way to get change is policy implication. So the policy subcommittee, we put together 8 different action beliefs of the 8 most pressing things that we felt needed to be addressed regarding police reform. And then fast forward to where we're at now, we also start to look at police reform evaluation. So the whole purpose of the advisory group that was created, it was to help the Center for Justice Research come up with a strategic research and program approach to police reform. How are we going to address this? We also served as technical advisors on different police reform efforts, research protocols, as well as policy development. And the whole purpose of it was to provide advice to police administrators, mayors, and other government officials on research and development in areas specifically related to police reform. So also during this time, during the pandemic, we also came out with a report. And what that report did was it looked at the intersection of COVID, but also what was going on across the world in regards to fatal police shootings. So this is just a chart that's from one of the reports that we published a couple years ago, and it depicts fatal police shootings of Black people. And seeing how that number, you can see right there in May of 2020, it peaked at 30. Around this time, once again, 2020, it's also during the pandemic. So also a thing to keep in mind is that the Washington Post plays a very important role in tracking fatal police shootings. So they have been tracking, the Washington Post has been tracking fatal police shootings since 2015. So a lot of information that you may see across on news media outlets or whatnot regarding police shootings, it's from the Washington Post. So I highly recommend, if you have not looked at it, to definitely look at it. They have some very good data analysis and visualization. But one of the things that sticks out to me on their particular website is that although half of the people that are shot and killed by the police are white, Black Americans are shot at a disproportionate rate. That's what makes this police reform topic just at the forefront every time an unarmed Black individual is shot and killed by the police, because they're impacted at a disparate rate. So another question for you: what are the top priorities for police reform? If you had to think off the top of your head, if you had to think about what you see on the news, what are some of the main areas of policing comes to mind when you think about reform? And same as the last time, you can jot that in the chat, and let's just see what y'all come up with. This also may be very beneficial to your research projects. I heard you have research projects coming up. Excessive force, de-escalation, training. Yep, implementation of body-worn camera programs, community relations. Yep, those are all amazing things. Also, the one thing that always sticks in my mind, so like I said, I'm a former federal law enforcement agency. So I went to FLEXI, the Federal Law Enforcement and Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, many years ago. And one of the main things that always stood out to me from my training and what I always share with students is the continuum of force. That was something that was drilled in us from like my very first day that I arrived to the academy to the very first day that they issued my duty weapon. I don't recall a time where we didn't have conversations about the continuum of force, de-escalation. We had an extensive, oh, I see a flexi wave. I recall that it was ingrained in everything from defense tactics, from the legal side of it to the policy side of it. That's one thing that I felt made my training at the federal level so amazing, was that extensive use of force training. So y'all mentioned a lot of different things about the top priorities of police reform. So as I mentioned before, the Center for Justice Research, we came up with 8 police action briefs. These are the first 4 that we released. Obviously, right out the gate, we released banning chokeholds, right? That was at the top of our list, especially following on the heels of the murder of George Floyd. Then we came out with duty to intervene, as well as ban of no-knock warrants due to Breonna Taylor. And then we also started looking at redefining qualified immunity. That's something that may be of great interest to you all as attorneys about this thing about qualified immunity. Also, 4 other ones we came up with were reallocation of police funds, or what other people may refer to as defunding the police, as well as education and training, National Police Misconduct Database, and a civilian review board. So once again, these were the top 8 areas that we felt were of the most pressing topics to address regarding police reform action briefs. Very good question, Stephen. We focus on chokeholds, but within that action brief, we talked a lot about different type of neck restraints. Every single one of these police action briefs, the whole purpose of it was to compile all the relevant literature that was available at that time related to these top 8 police reform efforts that we were looking at. So we started writing, so George Floyd's murder took place in May. We started writing these action briefs in July, and we released them about a year later. And the whole purpose was to get them into the hands of policymakers and stakeholders and mayors and things of that nature, so that they could have the most up-to-date at the time information about these 8 areas of police reform, as well as we provided some recommendations and solutions at the end. So the purpose of these police action briefs, they were not written super fancy with the scholarly big words for journal publications or whatnot, although we are turning them into journal publications currently. The whole purpose were to make them, they're probably about anywhere from 6 to 7 pages, so they're not very lengthy, but it's literally to disseminate to individuals where it's a quick resource for them. And these are all posted on the Center for Justice website, and it has more information about all of those on there as well. So here's a little bit more information. So kind of narrowing down a little bit more. So fairly recently, Arnold Ventures came out with some very good information about police reform as well. And just kind of looking at where are the areas where the majority of bills are taking place. So a large majority of bills that were proposed, or one area of police reform efforts that people feel that is the most pressing, is police officer certification and hiring. So looking at it from the lens of, let's address this problem at the front end. Who are we hiring? So I can't speak for state and local, but I know my journey to be a federal special agent was quite lengthy. It took well over a year and a half with multiple interviews, different type of interviews, structured interviews, one-on-one interviews, psych evaluation, lots of different things to get me to the actual offer for hire or whatnot. The federal government is a little bit different as well. Most federal agencies, to be a 1811 or criminal investigator / special agent, you have to have a minimum of a 4-year college education. I think there's a couple that do not require it. I think federal air marshals, but I don't think they're classified as 1811s. Also, for most federal agencies, in addition to having a 4-year, some do require that you have prior law enforcement experience as well. There's been a little shift on the federal side, where they are starting to require more individuals to have prior law enforcement experience. On the state and local, things are a little bit different. On the state and local side, every local agency has their own certification kind of requirements, as well as their own hiring process, as well as their own type of requirements. Some agencies require as low as only 46 college credit hours in comparison to maybe a 2-year degree, in comparison to a 4-year degree. So we have what we have is this range of criteria and certification for police officers to get hired. So other areas of bills that have been produced has also within officer misconduct. So we see a lot of bills that were introduced that focus on use of force standards and duty to intervene. So anything that falls within officer misconduct. And then we also have seen reform efforts that fall on the lines of policing data collection and transparency. As a researcher, that's the area that I'm very much interested in. Data collection and transparency. In order to do program evaluations, in order to evaluate the state of police reform, we need access to data as a researcher. But there's a very good question over here. What about immigration and custom enforcement officers? That's a very good question. And I'm assuming, Rebecca, you're asking about the qualifications for that particular job. So that's actually the agency that I worked for, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as a special agent. The requirement was a 4-year degree. I did not have to have prior law enforcement experience history. However, there's also different roles within all the different federal agencies for policing per se. So there is that category of 1811, which is a special agent or criminal investigator, but also Immigration and Customs, they have what they refer to as detention officers. So I don't know what the requirements are off the top of my head for detention officers, but any type of 1811 special agent position with the government, it does require a it does require a 4-year degree, and it does not have to be necessarily criminal justice. How difficult is it? I love all the questions, y'all. Y'all are making this very easy to present. So thank y'all for that. How difficult is it? Wait, I think I have another one. Okay, how difficult is it to gain access to policing data, and is most of this data collected by police agencies themselves? That's a very good question. It can be quite difficult, as you can imagine. We have to put in IRB requests. Sometimes that information may be available through open access, public access records. Sometimes we may have MOUs with these different departments, but you kind of have to think of along the lines of, do you think police departments do you think they will want us to have access to their data? Some do, some do not. So as I move along a little bit farther in the presentation, that will be definitely one of the limitations that I'll definitely be addressing. Let's see. So this takes us to the purpose of our study that we started to think about. So after we kind of moved past our action briefs, we started to focus on, so MOU is a memorandum of understanding. So when you're working in collaboration with different organizations and agencies. So as we were working through our police action briefs, And we started the dissemination of rolling them out. We started rolling them out on our social media once every week. And then once all 8 were released, we kind of packaged them and made sure that various entities had access to them. So then we kind of fast forward about a year later, and we started, about a year ago, we started thinking about, okay, a year after all of these different policies being implemented, where do they stand? So we started in the midst of several other projects that we're working on and several other research things that we're doing at simultaneously. We kind of planted the seed of how about we start initiating a plan to evaluate the state of these police reform efforts. So our purpose is to design a comprehensive, data-driven way of measuring the effectiveness of the post-Floyd police reform efforts in Houston. So sometimes we think big. We thought about looking across the nation. Then we realized, okay, maybe let's scale this down. Maybe if we start focus on Houston and other similarly situated entities, that's where that data collection comes into play. So we wanted to impact all the different type of reforms, and we essentially want to create an instrument of how to do that. So that is still ongoing. I actually have a couple emails about it today that we're trying to figure out, and we're trying to work through on addressing a couple of different things. So based upon the literature that was out there, we realized that nobody has really dived deep into this to evaluate all the different police reform efforts. And there are a lot of police reform efforts that have been introduced. So some of our main research questions, we broke it down into 4 specific areas, and I'll talk about those outcomes in a little bit. But so we're interested in what impacts have police reform efforts had on public trust and confidence in law enforcement. So we're trying to see, has the implementation of specific policies, has it changed the public's opinion about law enforcement? So there's a couple of different ways we're still trying to address how we're going to go about collecting this data. This may very well be done through some type of survey. We're also interested in looking at, to what extent have police reform efforts led to a reduction in instances of excessive use of force by law enforcement? We're also interested in civilian oversight, so transparency and accountability. And what also may come underneath that is qualified immunity, possibly. We're also interested in police reform efforts on crisis intervention strategies. So are there any other alternatives that police officers have implemented in regards to addressing policing concerns, such as sending out a mental health provider with officers, sending out social work providers, anything that relates to CIT strategies. So once we kind of found out specifically what questions we're interested in answering, right now we're kind of in the research and design methodology stage. So we've identified our outcome measures, our 4 main areas that we're interested in looking at, because there are a lot of police reform efforts out there in different categories. So we're kind of focusing on trust, legitimacy, and procedural justice. In the past, those have been researched and looked at and through the realms of different type of surveys, and usually those surveys are sent out by police departments. So we're interested in asking police departments whether or not, since the murder of George Floyd, have they conducted any type of survey to kind of gauge trust, legitimacy, and procedural justice. We're also interested in use of force, obviously, specifically in areas related to body-worn cameras, de-escalation training, etc. We're also, that other outcome measure we're interested in is civilian oversight, transparency, and accountability, as well as crisis intervention strategy. So these are the 4 areas that we're interested in. That either could be, we look at all these in one paper or one study, or we break this down into 4 separate studies. That comes around with once we're able to see the data. Also, our next step that we're at right now, and literally this is what all the email conversations that I'm dealing with our team of researchers is, we're trying to identify appropriate data sets. We're trying to figure out, in the midst of sending out data requests to the Houston Police Department, we're also seeing, are there any current data sets out there that we can use that's available to the public? There's the police scorecard, there is the Washington Post. So right now we have a couple of researchers that are just hitting the ground fast, just trying to figure out what are the most appropriate data sets to look at every one of those outcomes. We're also trying to determine important dates of interest. That's very important because with a program evaluation, you want to be able to see at the point of implementation, what did it look like beforehand? And then from the point of implementation, what happened? What was the trend like? That's very difficult because a lot of different police departments, and we're specifically looking at HPD, a lot of police departments said they were going to do a lot of things. There was countless press conferences, countless just policy implementations that departments talked about implementing. Whether or not they did is what we're kind of having a hard time identifying, since we don't have access to their data right now. So one specific date that we kind of are zeroing in on is April 29th of 2021, specifically for Houston. So on that date, April 29th, 2021, Mayor Sylvester Turner, he had a press conference that talked about policies that the Houston Police Department were going to implement. Also based upon that date, those policies that were implemented were based upon the Mayor's Police Task Force that was created in 2020. So shortly after George Floyd's murder in 2020, the mayor put together a task force of a wide range of researchers and stakeholders and community members to identify areas specifically in Houston where they can figure out police reform. There was like over 200 areas that Houston said they were going to address. So based upon this press conference in on April 29, 2021, keep in mind that's almost 2 years ago, but that's the date that we're rocking with. There were a couple of policies that were discussed in the press release. One of those was an independent oversight board, and they named a new board chair. We don't know what came about of that or not, but that was just one of the things that the mayor implemented, was an executive order to restructure the independent police oversight. At that time also, he mentioned on April 29, 2021, a ban on no-knock warrants for non-violent offenses. Think back to 2020, shortly after George Floyd murder, not only were there a ban on chokeholds and neck restraints across the nation from different departments, several departments also banned no-knock warrants. Also on April 29, 2021, the mayor mentioned expanding existing partnerships with Houston Police Department, mental health professionals, and social service organizations. Not sure what that looks like. Not sure if it was implemented on that date of April 29th or not. Also on that date, the mayor also mentioned revamping the department's body-worn camera policy. And with that, he stressed within 30 days, they would make it mandatory the release of all officer-involved shootings where there was an injury or a death. Also regarding body-worn camera, he mandated 24-hour release video if a federal or state prosecutor opens an official investigation into the department. So these are just things, like I said, we don't have a hard, firm date of every single policy that was implemented in Houston. We don't have a firm date, but we have a starting point. We have that April 29, 2021. So we can go back 2 years prior to that and probably 2 years after, so where we're at now, and kind of go from there. So that leaves us a chance to discuss. So any other questions that y'all have, if you want me to go into detail about more stuff, but that's kind of where we're at. The thing about one of the limitations of this study right now is one is, you set deadlines of when you want to get stuff done, when you don't have access. We literally have been trying to get data access for about, it's been well over 6 months, probably closer to 9 months, going back and forth with requesting data, seeing if they'll release data, providing them with specific questions, as at the same time trying to figure out, are there other areas that we can obtain data from that can answer some of these questions? Any questions for me?
Jennifer, what a great overview. I really appreciate that. And hopefully that was of use to our researchers as well, recognizing even to date, I've heard some of those similar challenges in regards to access to information and timeline and how you identify research questions. So I know there's a few questions in the chat, but Katie, I see your hand raised, so I'm going to throw it to you first.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is incredible. And I'm so excited to like dig through your website and read all your research briefs. Yeah, just really, really incredible work. I wanted to ask about body worn cameras. I feel like on every one of these calls, I'm going to ask about body worn cameras. So one of the things that I have heard kind of both informally and from like legislators who have put forward bills on body worn cameras is that kind of increasingly, it seems like body worn cameras are like low hanging fruit. So like either they put forward like an entire package and like body worn cameras are the easy thing that like get, not that it's easy, but like they get implemented and everything else gets dropped, or like advocates are pushing for something totally different and body worn cameras is like what they get. So, which is not to say that body worn cameras aren't important. Or valuable. But that, like just thinking about, you said that like that intersects with kind of two research areas, like to what extent do the reform efforts lead to a reduction in use of force and what impact do they have on public trust and accountability? So how, like when you, like for a question like that, like if, and so like, for instance, like yesterday, I got an email about a rally opposing the use of body worn cameras, like as a solution to a police involved shooting where the family was demanding something else. How do you formulate the research question in order to like figure out what data sets you need to answer something like that, where you have like a tool that is potentially being promoted, where like the promotion of a particular tool like maybe has value but also has the potential to like degrade trust? Like how do you begin to formulate that kind of question?
Well, first thing I would say is you got to conduct a literature review. See what is already out there on the topic of body worn cameras and see what data sets they used as well and what was their research methodology. That's always going to, when you're trying to formulate your research questions and your methodology, it's always going to be driven usually by the literature review and what literature is currently out there, and you finding the gap in that literature to see how to formulate your research questions. So I'm not completely well versed on body worn cameras, and every county is different. We took some time out, and I'm not sure if it's on our website or even if we published it or not, with those, I don't think we did it with those action briefs or whatnot, but we were just trying to figure out what was the state of every state's policy on body worn cameras. And that was a rabbit hole that we fell into, and it was like almost every single state had a different policy regarding body worn cameras. So that would be a rabbit hole you'll probably dive into. Then you can start looking at the literature and seeing, well, out of the literature that's out there, what does it say about the effectiveness of body worn cameras, starting at the highest level of research with the random controlled trials or the quasi-experimental, and kind of going from there. So that would be my suggestion. I hope that answers your question, but body worn cameras is, yeah, and it's definitely going to resurface a lot because in conversation, because I think about the death, the murder of Tyree Nichols. So it may seem like a low hanging fruit, but then it's back in the forefront now with that particular murder. And then it has some people wondering, well, we have footage of that, and it still didn't stop the officers. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down as well. But there is some very good literature out there on body worn cameras though. Did that answer your question? I hope so.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really.
I saw Holly next.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking with us. This is fascinating. In evaluating the efficacy of these programs, I'm wondering, is it being considered, so this is the program that they set out to implement, this is the effect that we've seen, clearly this program must not be good, or are you kind of also going to evaluate, okay, like this idea was good, this law was good, but it wasn't actually followed, it wasn't put into practice how it should have been? Is that kind of going to be part of the discussion?
Absolutely. When it comes to program evaluations, what you're essentially doing is you're trying to see, did that program do what it set out to do? So if a program that was implemented, we may ask a simple question, did your company or did your agency implement a program to reduce the number of excessive use of force incidents? And based upon that particular program they implemented, did we see it not only a decline in excessive use of force, but also a decline in racial disparity of excessive use of force? If it was determined that that program was not effective, then it would be based upon suggestions to improve that policy, finding gaps in that particular policy or gaps in that particular program that didn't work. So program evaluations can serve a multitude of purposes. Usually the essential one is, did the program do what it set out to do, which is reform policing, make a difference in policing, whatever our outcomes are? Did it improve that? If it did not, why did it not do it? Was it not implemented for enough time? Was it not effectively implemented? Was some officers implementing it? Were some officers not? So for the crisis intervention, did officers, when a 911 call came in, did they, reach out to a mental health provider? Did they not? So it's all about how the program was implemented. Very good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oxney, I've seen a few questions from you in the chat, so I'll throw it to you next.
I was wondering about how specific agencies are how specific agencies are ranked in terms of data gathering. For example, data you get from police agencies versus non-police agencies. And also, specifically to my research question, I wanted to know if you've had any success in getting policing data, specifically regarding CIT and mental health diversion from any non-policing agencies.
So right now, unfortunately, we have not gotten much data. Requests out there, and getting the data is a whole situation. So as of right now, we haven't gathered much data, as well as the ranking of the data. I would say, just from the experience so far, some of the data that's provided on Washington Post, as well as the police scorecard, is amazing. So if you haven't checked out that website, I think it's called policescorecard.org. And it's from one of the creators from Campaign Zero. I believe his name is Samuel. And the data, he has his full data set available to the public. So it actually may be of interest to some of y'all and some of y'all's stuff you're looking at. And they gathered a lot of different information from different counties, different cities about policing, but a full-blown evaluation has not been conducted yet. But it's a great kind of data hub to go in there and extract what you need from different organizations. And from what I've seen, their stuff is very well organized. And it may just be a matter of, sometimes you'll learn in the research game, you have to piece together your data sets. So whatever you may not be able to get from one agency, maybe you'll have to get it from like a public access place like the Public Scorecard or Washington Post to try to, or you may have to tweak your research questions. And that's what we've had to do a couple of different times, was tweak our research questions to get that information. In regards to data about the use of CIT, that's another thing. That's a matter of, one, did these agencies implement that? Because once again, there was a lot of talks about police departments sending out mental health server providers with police officers, and whether or not they did it or not. So even being able to get to the point to request that information right now, we don't have information on it as of this moment. Very good question. Thank you.
Shelby, I think I saw your hand.
Yes, I removed it. I was just gonna talk about an instance. I did not know about this Washington Post link, and so I've been listening to you and also like devouring it because it's so awesome. And I was just looking, I'm from Louisiana, and there's been a recent shooting and death here, and it was not featured in the system under the dates where specific victims are listed. And I was just wondering, if this was national data and how it was being tracked, but you don't work for them, so I wouldn't expect you to know the answer after I thought about it for a second.
Yeah, some of that you have to look. They have a link on there about their methodology, and it may have not been updated, or there may be certain criteria. So that's another thing when you're conducting your own research and collecting data, as well as using some of these other websites, understanding their methodology and their limitations and how up to date their information is. So that's just something to kind of have in the back of your mind as well.
What other questions do we have? I suppose, Jennifer, I have one while students are continuing to think through things. What engagement, if any, do you have with community members when you're forming these research questions? What does that process look like?
That's a very good question. I have to see the link to a focus group that we did last year. So one thing that we do at the Center for Justice Research, we do a translational research model. So what that means is we bring a lot of different people to the table, from community members to stakeholders to researchers, because we truly feel like the closest person to the solution for the problem are people that are, actually impacted by the problem. So we take a lot of consideration into that as well. So we did focus groups about a year and a half ago, about 6 different focus groups where we were asking them just a wide range of questions about how they felt about policing, how they felt about bail reform, all these different topics. So we definitely take in consideration in our research the community's perspective as well. That's sometimes where our research starts, is by going to the community first and trying to learn what their opinions and their perspectives are. So kind of a little bit unrelated to policing. So another area of my research focuses on family and parental incarceration. So individuals that are impacted by having a parent or a family member involved in the justice system. And on top of being a researcher, former practitioner, I'm also about service. So every Monday I go inside this correctional facility for incarcerated mothers, and I teach trauma-informed yoga. And I'm not there in the capacity to conduct research. I'm really there I'm a yogi, I'm a yoga teacher. But it's just amazing how me being a yoga teacher also intersects with the criminal justice system. And I found a way to put all that together. So I'm very in touch with not only the research aspect, the former practitioner aspect of it, but also being able to spend time with individuals that are directly impacted by the system. That gives you a completely different perspective as well. So you never know what research questions or ideas may come about just from you doing stuff, interacting with those different type of populations. But very good question. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Most definitely. I really appreciate that degree of engagement and ensuring that all of the different voices, particularly those most impacted by both the violence as well as the solution, are being involved. I think that indicates a true degree of participatory involvement that should be reflected in a lot of the research that we're advocating. Lakshmi, I see another question from you. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one, but I'll allow the floor.
Oh, I was wondering if there's any laws specifically or general standards for transparency that commit or compel agencies to provide data like the policing data, and how you would engage an agency which is sort of hesitant, I guess, to let you gain access to that data.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Some agencies are very transparent with their data, and some agencies have created transparency dashboards where you can go to their dashboard and gather information that you need. Now, there's maybe some gaps in that information, but at least it's a starting point. So as I mentioned on April 29th, HPD mentioned a transparency dashboard. And I don't have the link in front of me, but it does have some information on that. And we saw dashboards and transparency kind of begin in the court component. We saw prosecutor offices creating these dashboards about their caseloads and dispositions, and as individuals navigate throughout the court system. So now we're starting to see a few more dashboards for police agencies, and it definitely makes it easier when we want to dive in and learn about some of the things that these police departments are doing. However, today, there are no set laws that say police offices have to have a transparency data dashboard. Would it be helpful? As a researcher, absolutely. Then we would have to go through all the hoops and all that kind of stuff to gain that data. But it also starts off with partnerships, having great rapport and relationships with police departments, and kind of proposing it to them as, look, we just want your department to be the best department that it can be. Wouldn't you want to know how your department is doing in regards to police reform? And if it's not doing well, we can provide evidence-based solutions to help you get to where it needs to get to. But very good question. Thank you so much.
Jennifer, what impact, if any, do you think your past experience as a law enforcement officer has had both on your research as well as your access to information? Do you feel like that's opened additional doors for you, allowed more open conversations with individuals?
Yeah, definitely. I think by kind of having this kind of like dual relationship where I'm a former practitioner as well as a researcher, I had to kind of switch my brain from going from a practitioner to start thinking like a researcher. So I had to start thinking in the terms of data, thinking in the terms of policy implications and things of that nature. But also being a former law enforcement officer, it definitely these last several years has taken me back to those several years ago when I went through a police academy, and looking at how I was trained on the federal side, which we know we do not see a lot of officer involved shootings per se on the federal side, but that's also a little bit different because on the state and local, they're out patrolling, they're in uniforms and things of that nature. But it had me think about the structure of my training as a federal agent. So it doesn't matter what federal agency you went through, minus, I believe, FBI, CIA. There were a couple that did not go to Flexi. But for the most part, every one of us that became an 1811, we had the same 3 months training. It was your CITP 1811, Criminal Investigator Training Program. Didn't matter if you were ATF, ICE, Capitol Police, whatever. Your 3 months was this standardized CITP training. And then after that, you went on to what we called your add-on. So my add-on is I went to ISAT, which was Immigration Customs Enforcement Special Agent Training. Other individuals may have went on to Secret Service or ATF, and they were there from anywhere from another additional 3 months or upwards to 4 months, depending on the programming, and you learned about that particular agency policy and procedures. But my first 3 months at the Federal Training Center, I was in a classroom of 40 individuals, and we were all from different agencies. And then we broke off after 3 months, and then we were in smaller classrooms of 20, and we were all preparing to be ICE agents. So this has given me a lot of different just insight on how state and local is different. just in Houston, we have a wide range of law enforcement agencies, from Houston Police Department, the county sheriff, precincts. We have like so many different precincts. We have Texas troopers, and every one of those agencies have a different type of training. Then the smaller agencies that don't have their in-house training, there's separate training where individuals pay for on their own, and then they get hired on by, a smaller agency. So it's given me a lot of insight on all the different requirements to be a state and local police officer, how there's not really a standardized way across the nation.
I'm seeing some questions in the chat about if you're collecting any data points that include agencies that are accredited versus those that are not.
So our main one is we're focusing on HPD, and our thing is that we can focus on HPD first, and then kind of branch out from there, maybe add in some other ones. Like I said, once again, we're just really just trying to get the data from the agencies that we can at this point. But there's some very good information in there. I'm making sure I save some of the information in here.
So could I kind of ask a piggyback question to that? Do you see how in kind of the data you're recording right now, how misconduct does play into you can't get accredited? Is that factoring in any way on your end, even in Houston?
Not sure yet, because we haven't dived that deep into it right now. Like I literally just got an email before I got on this call, and I haven't even looked at the Excel spread. I glanced at it and I was like, oh, that's going to take a lot of thought process for me to sort through, because you never know how you get the data, right? You get data, it may not be cleaned and coded, or actually what we're working on is compiling information from a couple of those open access places. So we're creating our own Excel data sheets, and we haven't even had a chance to sort through it. That's the fun part about research. You never know what you're going to get.
Holly.
So just kind of out of curiosity, I assume that a lot of the research you're doing is based on laws that were passed or police department policies. I'm curious if any of the work you're doing is like prosecutors' offices policies. I'm interested in progressive prosecution, and I'm curious if any specific prosecutors' offices policies are something that you're researching or looking into.
Very good question. So in the midst of this police reform project, my other big area of research interest actually is prosecutor decision making. That's where I spend a wealth of my time. So it's kind of unrelated to policing, but we're looking at more so prosecutor caseloads and the impact that it may have, like on plea bargaining and some other different points. So it's not related to policing per se, because we're looking at diversion programs, but not necessarily pre-arrest diversion programs. Our niche that we're kind of looking at is prosecutor-led diversion program. So that's kind of unrelated to policing reform, but that's another big project that we're working on that's also on our website. So that's where like one of my other big passions is dealing with prosecutor offices. And I kind of intertwine that with my criminal incarceration research, because I'm also interested in a family approach to prosecution and taking into consideration the trickle-down effect that incarceration has on families. So if we can get these different diversion programs and evaluate diversion programs to see which diversion programs are working or which are not. So that's kind of a whole separate project that we're working on that's not related to police reform evaluation. Very good question. That's on our website as well to learn more about that particular project.
Katie, I did see a hand go up and down.
Yeah, I had a question. Well, I realized that you had, I wasn't clear on, it sounds like you're mostly pulling from other databases. So one of the questions that I have, so I've done a lot of work with housing, and most of the data that or a huge amount of the data that exists on evictions is through like one firm. It's through the eviction lab at Princeton. And one of the things that they talk about or that they like extensively is that when they're pulling, like the need to like kind of scrub and like modify the data so that it can be reflective of the things that they're actually looking for. So for evictions, right, you're pulling from like 1 million different district court records, most of which aren't necessarily collecting demographic data. They aren't necessarily looking at racial, like they're not looking at like race and gender, which are the two big things that the eviction lab like wants to focus on. Do you like when are you primarily using data that is already aggregated and processed, or do you have to do a lot of that processing?
If we're able to get agency level data, amazing. But while we wait on getting agency level data, we also at the same time will see what else data is out there, so we can do a couple of different things. It's always great if we can get agency level data and they have all the beautiful outcomes that we need and has all the different variables that we're interested in, race, age, gender, zip code, and all that. But sometimes we don't know. We don't know if it will have that information.
What is agency level data?
So like requesting it directly from Houston Police Department or whatever department, and they give us that information. But you never know the state of that data. So while we wait for getting data from different agencies, sometimes we'll see what else is out there that's available. And then also the advantage of doing that is if we're able to see what else is out there, we can tweak our research questions and maybe go back to Houston Police Department and say, these are the specific variables that we need based upon some of the other different data sets that we've come across, like the police scorecard. So it just kind of depends.
And so for data that you're getting from police departments, directly from police departments, I guess that typically would, like if it's like data about like complaints or whatever, like that would, like that typically does have like demographic data encoded.
Sometimes it may, sometimes it may not. Right now, we don't have that data to determine that, but also whether or not they capture ethnicity. So, and some of the gel data that we've done on other projects, like on my dissertation, like the gel data I had, it did not capture ethnicity. So I had to end up coding my data as Black or non-Black because I didn't have ethnicity. So it just depends, and you take whatever data you can get and you have a nice long section about all the data limitations. But very good question.
That's fascinating.
It is pretty cool. It keeps me in rabbit holes daily.
Any other questions? We do still have some time, so even if you have questions about.
This is all my contact information on here. You can go to our website and you can find the action briefs. You can find just all the things that we do. You can see some of my research on criminal incarceration, some of our upcoming projects. We do a lot of op-eds. I love writing editorial pieces. Our thing is, in addition to the research journals and policy briefs and all that different type of stuff, we try to get information out there in a lot of different ways. And one of my ways of really getting kind of words on paper, I love writing editorial pieces. So condensed versions of a topic and spreading awareness about it. So being able to kind of fluctuate between writing the action briefs, the articles, as well as editorial pieces. Yeah, that also helps you get a little bit more clear understanding about possible research questions as well.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other hands raised or outstanding questions in the chat. So I think with that, Jennifer, I'm going to extend all of the gratitude to you for being with us today and talking us through your process, some of the challenges, how you have honed your scope, and really just the great work that you and your team are doing. Thank you for being with us and sharing your experience and expertise. Yeah. For the rest of the group, we will be meeting next Monday, March 6th. Can't believe it is March already. And we'll be hearing from Tiffany Russell with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. She'll be talking to us about crisis and justice partnerships, the 988 number and behavioral health crises coordination. That's of direct relevance to a few of the research ideas that have been identified. So hopefully that will be of additional value to you. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. I will send the recording out to the group as soon as it is available, and look forward to seeing those who are able to join at the office hours on Wednesday. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Take care, y'all. Great meeting y'all.